So you're now my third group. And each time I raise my expectations about how much we can have fun together, or how much we can work together, or how much we can do things different. I actually spent some time during my break moving things around, so you will see some things that the other groups didn't see. So then when you talk to each other, if you ask it and they say, what are you talking about? It's not that they forgot it. It's that they never saw it in the first place. So I'm thrilled to be here. I'm excited because I know that as I've spoken to Susan and Emily and gotten to kind of feel your culture, that you really do have an extremely dedicated culture, one that does care a lot about people, because the work that you do is about really helping people bring their aspirations to life in the world. And there's nothing more exciting than that, is really helping people make their dreams come true. And so I know that every conversation does make a difference. I spent some time, I've been in this business for 33 years, and I'll tell you a little bit about how this all got started, but I have been hired to work inside of companies where they actually asked me to do conversational makeovers for them, where they know that a point of contact when they are meeting with a customer or when they're meeting with their employees, if that moment doesn't feel good to both parties, what's going to happen is very different than if it does feel good. And we're now studying in the world of neuroscience, what's the neurochemistry behind those interactions? At the moment of contact, can we actually predict what's going to happen? And I want you to begin to think that you can predict what's going to happen. And I want you to come out of this session understanding what are the things, and I actually call them red and green. What are the things that close the brain, and that's red? And what are the things that are going to open people's brains? And when you can start seeing the differences, and by the way, I've done this work around the world now, so I see it doesn't matter what country I go to, people still connect to this. In Dubai, I had people saying that this was what their Koran was writing about, but a long time ago, before they had the neuroscience to prove that it was right. And so I think we're onto something. I believe it's the beginning of a movement of people really understanding how to go from I to we and really connect with each other. And so this afternoon, we're going to talk about what does that mean to apply to the work that you do with your employees and with each other. I told Susan that originally the word was collaboration when you called me up the first time. And when I had a chance to write a dictionary for Random House in 1984, and they asked me to come up with 3,500 new business terms. Now, I hadn't been in business more than 3 years, so for me to figure out that was kind of weird, but I figured out a strategy for how to do it. And when I realized when I was reading words, the word collaboration means cohorting with the enemy. Yet we use it today, it came out of war, we use it today like it's the epitome of a good relationship. And so part of the work that I've been doing is realizing that when you invent new words that didn't exist before, it changes the whole world in front of us. So, for example, in 1992, when Goldman introduced the concept of level 5 and humility as part of what leaders would do, after having spent hundreds of years of thinking that when a leader gets really strong and powerful and knows more than anybody else, that they're now at the epitome of their pyramid, and now to hear somebody come in and in one word completely shift our thinking. So that's the kind of work that this is also about, is opening up our minds to how you as leaders, by inventing or redefining words with the people that you work with every day. And I'm leaving this as one of the challenges. I do a lot of experiments, and the word is experimentor, mentors of experiments. And when you can do them yourself and do them with others and demonstrate to people that you're still learning and that you're inventing and creating with them, again, that kind of energy shifts how we use our brains, shifts how we think. And it does so much. I'm going to show you what I believe is now an explanation of where it happens in the brain, how it happens, and how you can influence that. Does that make sense so far? Is there anything in particular that you would like me to focus on, that either because of what I said or what I haven't said, that might be of interest to you, so that I can begin to move from the last two groups and what their interests were to something that would really spark for you? Anybody? This will help us put some shape and context. Otherwise, you're just going to hear what I want to say. So you get a chance now. Anybody? Yes?
Most of the folks here are in a leadership program, and so I'm guessing that there's a multiplier effect around the application of this when you're in a leadership role. So just generally in that context, if there are sort of particular distinctions, points to emphasize, I'd love to hear that.
And I'm going to start out with the one that you've just prompted me by the way you asked the question, which is that in spite what I want to say about the interaction dynamics that take place between people, when you have a leader involved in those dynamics. There's something that's hardwired in all human beings about how we have a hierarchy that we have to respect, and that leaders have to do an awful lot to shift that, because people automatically almost fall into, you have more power than I do, and then they interpret that, and therefore that means that I can or can't do the following things. And that's the biggest trap that leaders face every day, because here they just want their people to stand up and take charge and do all these wonderful things, and they're trying to figure out why they're not getting it, and they're not messing up. They're just being a leader with a title or a leader with power. I did work with Dreyer's and Edie's Grand Ice Cream. Some of you know where that ice cream is? Okay. Yeah, it's wonderful, wonderful ice cream, wonderful company. And Gary Rogers, who was the CEO, turned a $50 million company into a multi-billion-dollar company, and he worked hard on the culture. And he realized what I just said is so true, that leaders get caught up in a trap that they have to figure out how to undo before they even open up their mouths. And so he would do things, he was very mindful. I loved working with him because he would show me, demonstrate how he did that. He would walk into rooms, and he made a lot of the rooms have round tables so people were comfortable in a circle. There wasn't the hierarchy that when you sit at the end of a table, that automatically triggers the brain that I'm in a power stance now. And it's hard to undo that if you don't realize what's happening to you. You just get in it, it's natural. So round tables, he'd walk in, he would undo his tie, and he'd take off his jacket. Always when he was joining a meeting with people that were reporting up to him, to signal that he was there at their level. And instantly they got it. And then he'd lean in and he'd just listen. He would not direct, he wouldn't guide. He might ask provocative questions, or questions where he didn't have answers. And that's part of conversational intelligence, is realizing that when you join a group, how you connect, how you listen, and the first questions that you ask instantly can move around that leadership problem that leaders are faced with, right? And so he did a beautiful job of that. At Boehringer Ingelheim, when I was working with Digby Barrios, he would come into the leadership programs to address all the new people in the company. And he complained to me. He said, I don't understand it. I came in here and take my time so I can visit with these people and talk to everybody, and I wait for the questions, and there are no questions. And it's like I have to pull them out of people. What's going on? And it's the same thing, power over assumed, and nobody wants to look foolish in front of their friends. So we had him come in the second day. We had people meet at tables to think about together what questions they'd want to ask. And then so we primed their confidence, we primed their thinking, we primed their ability to speak up. And by the second day when he came in, he got questions, and his first comment to me was, are we changing the people we're hiring? What's happening? So this work around conversational intelligence is trying to look at what's the relationship we have to others that's defining the conversation. How can we change that if it's not working? And how do we prime the space for something different to happen so we can empower people to bring the best they can to the table? When we're intimidated, we don't use the same part of our brain. We're hooked by the lower brain, and we literally can't say the same words that we have thought that we'd be able to say. Make sense? So I hope that was helpful. Other things that you hope that we can cover? Something that's been inside of you and haven't found the answer for yet. I know you're all smart, but come on, pretend you're not for a minute. Just give me a...
So mine is somewhat similar and related, which is just today I was in a conversation with people on my team, and I really wanted them to tell me what they thought, and including disagreeing with me. And I felt that dynamic, or I've known that dynamic at times. And so any thoughts you have on fostering a kind of best answers, let's argue with each other, kind of conversation that's still positive and constructive and collegial. Mm-hmm.
So I have a question for you. When you set the stage for them to do that, what do you do to set the context so that their brains are able to reconfigure a shift? I know you said you'd like them to do it, but how do you set the stage for that to happen?
Well, I think it's multiple steps. I think one is, here's the problem we're trying to solve. Mm-hmm. Here's how I've thought about it to date. I really want your thoughts. And then open the door to have that be more than one conversation. Mm-hmm. What I found is the first time I did it, we had some thoughts. But then they came back 2 days later, and they'd talk to each other and then said, we want to sit with you again. Uh-huh. And I thought, oh, that's good. This is a good thing.
Yeah.
But, there are moments where I can feel their discomfort
Yeah.
in putting out a point of view that's directly opposed to my point of view. And yet I want to say, no, but that's what we want.
Yep. Yep. So here's a suggestion of something you can try. That making that request, they still assume that it's going to go back to a potential for them to look foolish in front of their friends, or without realizing it, to push. Maybe they'll push one of your buttons and you won't be able to keep it cool, like you're saying, right? All those things that are possible, because that's normal, right? That what if you were to figure out a way to create rules of engagement where they get to put rules on the table before you start the conversation about things that might impact how you interact with them or how the group interacts with each other, and elevates the game a little bit so that they're writing the rules, they're writing the 10 Commandments.
That's a good idea.
Yeah.
But do you do that? Sometimes these conversations kind of sneak up on you. It has to be a high-stakes conversation to say, let's have rules of engagement, unless that's just your normal practice.
Yeah, yeah. So the more you do it, the more it becomes. And when I show you what level 3 is, you'll see that the rules of level 3 enable you to have those kind of conversations. So if they knew what level 3 was, if everybody does, they'd say, we want to have a level 3 conversation with you. And then it's power with, not power over. And so people's minds start to connect to new terms. If there's no history, that they'll think of that and say, oh, I can do that. Does that make sense? Yeah. I work with a 350,000 people company this past year for 2 years, actually, to help them through a very big transition. And we took the senior team and helped them work through together how to get from level 1 and level 2 to level 3 conversations. And level 3 is where transformation takes place. It's where people are activating parts of their brain, the prefrontal cortex and the heart connection, where they're saying their truth to each other and with each other, and know that it's not going to create harm, that the truth is going to be more powerful than pretending you're telling the truth, and things like that. So it gets people in a completely different state of mind. It's candor and caring, risk-taking, all happening, and it's not about how important I am. And once they got to do that, and we'd do rounds where we'd have conversations, and then we'd stop and ask them to critique, how well did you hold the space with each other? How well did you really say what was on your mind? All those kinds of things to test it. And once they got that they could do it and they could feel it, they said, oh my God, I could feel the difference when people were that open. Because we know what open feels like. Don't we? I mean, when somebody's really honest with us, we can feel it. We're hardwired for that. In 0.07 seconds, we're reading whether a person really likes us or not. That 0.07 seconds is a nanosecond. Then we have to put words to it to really explain what that means. But it's really quick. So once we start to get into the practice of it, it's kind of like learning how to reduce the stress in your life. Once you learn the pattern of stress and non-stress, you can go, okay, you breathe, you do all the things, and bingo, you're there. And that's what this work can do. So, okay, are you all ready? Yeah? Okay. So, conversational intelligence. This is how great leaders build trust and get extraordinary results. I wanted to tie together conversations and trust. And I wanted to do that because there's a wonderful neuroscientist from Temple University. She's the first woman to be hired in a business school as a neuroscientist. She has a double PhD. And in our conversations, she was saying to me that trust and distrust live in 2 different parts of the brain, which sort of goes against the idea that trust and distrust is a continuum. And by even knowing that distrust lives in the lower brain, trust lives in the upper brain, it opens up a beautiful story about, so what does that mean? And so I spent, beside trying to write this for many, many years and getting 100 rejections for it, I finally said I have to go to the right neuroscientists to help inform me so that I'm really nailing new insights. And so Angelica DeMoca introduced the piece about trust. And the bottom line of this in 1 or 2 sentences is that when we trust people, it's a different part of our brain. It's this part, prefrontal cortex, which has wisdom, insight, empathy, strategy, foresight, being able to really think about the future and actually grasping what the future might look like, because your brain is doing 3-dimensional thinking and actually can make these projections into the future. These are the things that great leaders and great people in the world from history, it's in the beginning of time, were able to do. And there's something about getting into that part of your brain that every human being can do. It's not just the smart ones. Conversational intelligence says we all have this. It's how to create the environments where this can be activated. And so how do we open up this part and our heart? And heart was not something that people talk a lot about in business, used to talk about in business. But now we're saying, and I'm saying, that it's the 5th brain that has the answers through with, if we can control the connection between, during our interactions with others, and how we feel in our heart and start to identify when we're in sync with people or out of sync, then we have the ability to start mastering our relationships in a completely different way. So what we're going to look at is, how does that happen in human beings? What do we need to trigger in each other to make that happen? Because when we do, we not only raise our intelligence and our emotional IQ, but we achieve something else that I think is a permanent, this is me speaking, this is what we used to call Judy's world in my family. But I think it makes a permanent impact on the DNA that we produce while we're in our life and transfer it to the next generation. I think that this is what evolution is all about. When we learn to move more into level 3 conversations, it reshapes the way our brain works, and then the next generation gets the benefit. We have what are called transcription genes, not just template. Template are the genes that give us the way we look. And for a long time, we thought that that's what we had as what we transferred to next generation. But if you look at how we looked 6,000 years ago, and I went to archaeological digs studying 6,000 year ago societies, they weren't doing innovations like we're doing. They had nothing like that. The innovation that we discovered was the first pot-belly stove back then. So something must be happening when people interact with each other that evolves our brain. And it's my belief that conversations activate these transcription genes, which write new thoughts on our heads, in our minds, in our hearts, and they get transferred. Make sense? So I just gave you what I didn't talk to any of the other groups about, because I figured that you as leaders are creating the next generation of thinkers and beings in the world, and you have that influence on shaping their lives that much. So these are game-changing insights for relationships, teams, and organizations. I want to show you a 2-minute little clip that pulls it all together, and I'd be curious after you see it if it, for anybody, creates a question of curiosity in your mind that you want to throw out in the room, so again, that we're shaping how we talk with each other.
There are many types of intelligence, from book smarts to street smarts, from intellectual intelligence to emotional intelligence, and each gives us our own unique abilities for personal success. Yet one type of intelligence is universal and different from all the rest. It's something everyone possesses, yet until now has remained hidden from plain sight. This intelligence has the game-changing power to strengthen relationships, transform teams, and shape the future of our organizations for mutual success. This universal intelligence is called conversational intelligence. Let me explain. Each of us speaks an average of about 16,000 words each day. Trillions of conversations are taking place around the globe every single second. But just how many of these conversations actually make a difference? 9 out of 10 conversations miss the mark. Not all conversations are easy, so we avoid them. We talk past each other, we bang heads, or we get addicted to being right and stop listening to what others are really saying. Now, advances in neuroscience are giving us the tools to look inside of our brains while we're having conversations to reveal just what is going on and why. What we are learning is that conversations are not just about words or information. Encoded in every conversation is a hidden language of trust. And when we speak with each other, significant neurochemical exchanges take place that impact how trusting or distrusting we will be. When we are stuck in distrustful, unproductive, and even destructive exchanges, we activate our fear networks, causing us to withdraw or fight or flee. Yet not all difficult conversations need to cause us to feel threatened, close down, and protect ourselves from harm. Imagine you could activate your wisdom to discover how to elevate the quality of your conversation in the moment. Learn how to gauge your impact and shift your influence positively. Develop ways to get in front of the curve in prime conversations for trust and mutual success. Conversational intelligence, how great leaders build trust and get extraordinary results, provides the tools, practices, and rituals to activate your hardwired ability for more effective, co-creative, and transformational life-changing conversations. Conversational intelligence. Change your conversations. Change your life.
Any top of mind, anything that came out of that little movie that'll raise your curiosity? So with that in mind, what I'd like you to do is, I'm I'd like you to do a ritual, a conversational ritual, and everybody needs to have at least one person to sit next to, so you have to find a partner. You can have three. Yeah, you can have three. You can have three, but everybody needs somebody to sit next to, or form a group of three. Yep. So here's what I'd like you to do. This is a conversational ritual that really does make a huge change in people's lives. I'd like you to know that when two people shake hands, that the touch is a signal inside the brain that you've gone past the 9-inch intimacy zone, and you're actually physically touching, which to the brain is a symbol of you're okay, you're a friend, not foe. When you do that, oxytocin gets produced, and you'll soon start to feel it. It's this extra rise of something that happens in your heart. Bruce McEwen from Rockefeller University has studied the production of oxytocin, which he believes is the highest level of neurotransmitters produced in the body. It used to be thought it was only women when they were lactating and nursing babies, but it's all the time. And it's a signal to move with someone. So I want you to do this, but I also want you to look in the person's eyes and take a second to feel the exchange of something else. And now you're getting a double dose of oxytocin. Okay? So I want you to feel it so that you can begin to experience that. Then I want you to share with your partner the following. What are some things that each of you feel make a great conversation? What's so necessary for the conversations to feel good and be good to you? And what are the things that make you feel bad in conversations? So if you could have that exchange for about 3 minutes, then we'll talk about it. Okay, wind down your conversations. Wind down your conversations. So did anybody hear, did anybody listen to the whole room or just listen to your conversation? Did you find yourself, some people are externals and they can listen to the outside well. They were talking and other people can't. But anyway, did you hear the rise in the sound over a period of time? Yeah. Oxytocin produces more oxytocin, which produces more conversation, which gets people kind of wound in a really good way. So that's good news. How many people found that some of the things that you talked about your partners had in common in terms of what they thought was a feel-good or a not feel-good conversation? Yeah. And so that it says something about something's going on for all of us that is becoming a universal about what feels good and what doesn't. So what closes us down? What did you find falls on this side? What is a not good conversation? What happens in that? Anybody? Emily has a mic to make it easy for you.
I think we talked about it being too one-sided, or when someone comes in with an agenda and pushes it through, versus it being, I guess, collaborative or equal.
Yeah. How many people had that one or something like that? Yeah, pretty good. We know that in conversations there's a pattern between how much somebody tells and how much somebody asks, how much somebody listens, that pattern. And when it doesn't feel fair, instantly, we're hardwired for that. Animals are. Monkeys, when they have bananas and they don't share them fairly, they get really upset with each other because it's kind of like that's important when we work together. So that's that one-side agenda. What else ended up on this side? Yeah.
So I'm actually reminded of fruit bats, which actually split a banana and share it with each other. It's really quite sweet to see. We're saying how when someone really doesn't listen to you, when they've asked your opinion, and then they're either looking beyond you for the next person, or they're getting ready to talk about what they want to talk about.
Yeah, exactly. I interviewed a new client that I ended up getting, and in the 3 hours that we spent together, he spent 95% of the time talking. And he was very sweet and nice, and he had a nice smile all the time. And when I asked him a question or said something like, that's really interesting, because that's similar to the kind of things that I've been thinking about. And he said, that's really nice. Now back to what I was saying. Yeah, so, but there's a fairness that disappears when that happens. And human beings are hardwired for fairness. It's one of the forces that drives humanity. What else?
When someone is distracted with a mobile device or another piece of equipment, and you can tell that they're not really listening to you.
Yeah, we hear so many stories of people coming in to talk to the boss, and he's got his computer over there while he's trying to listen to you. But that's, it's divided attention, right? It doesn't take much. When we give the opposite, the things that we really need, the whole conversation changes. Did anybody ever see the movie The Sliding Door with Gwyneth Paltrow, and there's something about, your life might be this way if you open up this door, and this door is the door where you have fairness and you exchange ideas and you really listen. And your whole future, this is really imprinting your future in a conversation. That's how important this is. Or the other way, where it doesn't work. Okay. Anything else on this side? Thank you for that. Yes, please, right down here.
A negative or aggressive tone in the speech?
Here's something new, because I've been pondering a lot, and I actually like your thoughts on this. A negative tone, a negative, aggressive tone, or something negative. There's a lot of work out in the world of positive psychology that has come up with, and I love the work that they've done. Barbara Fredrickson, for example, talks about 3 positive to 1 negative. And what I started, then there was before that was the criticism sandwich, where you said something good, then what you really thought, and then something good again to cover it up and say, I really like you. So we have all these attempts at trying to say the truth. But what I started to realize is that if it's a balance between positive and negative, it's still a world of judgment that you go in together. Because whether it's positive or negative, one reflects the other, so it's judgment. What I found in my research is that human beings love the truth. Sometimes the truth feels like it's negative because you're saying you're not doing as well as I'd really like you to do, and I know you can do, and that feels judgmental. But it's not, the answer to that is not to give up those comments and exchange them for saying something positive, because we feel that as disingenuous after a while. We're at a different place in our evolution as human beings. When people leave companies, they would rather have their boss say to them, and they say their best bosses are the ones that tell them the truth about where they stand in the company or who they really are, and do it with a caring approach. And so this work is to try to say, don't play the numbers game about more positive, because it'll come back to bite you. But learn how to shape a conversation so that somebody feels that you care when you deliver the news that they're not where they need to be. And it's a very different framework. So what else brings us to open up and feel good about the conversation?
Making time. Taking enough time to do it fully.
Yeah. And have you found, Susan, how much more time really means? Well,
it depends on this. Sorry, I lost the mic. Depends. I think for me, it depends on both the topic and the person, in the setting. But, we had a good example of asking for an opinion about something, and the other person said, well, do you really have time to do that now? Sort of a hallway thing. And said, well, really, it's bigger than a hallway conversation. So let's set aside time for a fuller conversation, tomorrow or next week. So I think being able to discern how big or how small something is, and for the things that are important, make sure we're dedicating enough time to it.
Yeah, and that's so powerful.
It's part of the caring thing that you described.
Yeah, and a lot of times the leaders will think, I don't have enough time to do this, so I can't really do it, and therefore I'm not going to do it. And what you said is think forward. Think about, let's create an opportunity where we can do it the right way. And boy, does that feel really good to somebody, really good. Anything else that makes it feel like it's a good conversation? I see a hand right there.
Just a sense of honesty or directness, or kind of explaining why something is important to you or why it means something to you or your team. Because then you get beyond reading between the lines and get to actually kind of talking about what matters.
Yeah, and so often we don't say why things are happening. We've heard a lot from Simon, what's his last name, Sinek, about the whys, and I think it's just that one word that can make all the difference in the world. And it's not why why did you do that? We've all been through that. Why did you do that? But the explaining why something is important is a very different kind of why for people. So one more question to ask all of you. How you work with leaders. You are leaders and you work with leaders, correct? So this seems like it's such human nature, like we should all do it. What really why doesn't it happen? If we all know that it's the right thing to do, what gets in the way? What is it that we need to be helping leaders do to get beyond that? Yes.
So how do you actually keep away your judgments, your thoughts, your solutions to whatever is being discussed before you actually completely listen?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just us trying to jump the gun and trying to fix the problem even before we completely understand the problem. Yeah.
Well, it would be great if we could do that. I mean, I know that I end up coaching people that are far down the road to not getting it. And I'm sure it doesn't happen here from the people that I've met. You do a really good job of this, but I know there's always room. And I know a lot of leaders, like the one that took 95% of the time talking, he didn't get that the impact was different than his intention. He intended to be really nice and sweet and smile, and then something else happened. So what we want to do is look at what's going on and what to do about it. So we want to look at aspirations that you have for your leaders and what inspired conversational intelligence, the neuroscience of CIQ, levels of conversation, what lowers and raises conversational intelligence, how to prime, and other CIQ rituals to give you something to work with the people that you work with. This is the I to we movement. The world is moving in this direction, and conversational intelligence was designed to help bring into focus not just the individual talents of a leader, making them better at presenting or persuading, but looking at better at influencing when it comes to other people, collaborating with other people. Just a short piece on this. When I started this work, I was 11, 12 years old, and I had discovered that my father was a stutterer, which was kind of an amazing thing to me because at that point in my life, my father was a dentist, and he went to the government and said, I want to bring dentistry around the world, and they made him an ambassador to the United States. He learned 7 languages, and he went around the world and lived in different countries, and beside having his dental practice, and helped start dental schools. And he did it without stuttering. And I said, how is it that you went from that to this? And he said, I had a teacher who really took me under her wing, and she put me in a play and made me the lead in the play. And when my father was in that role, something opened up in his brain, a new identity opened up that didn't have all the other identities from stuttering, and he literally could be in that role. And he went on to be the valedictorian of his class in college and the head of the debating team. He was amazing. What he got really good at was telling. He didn't get as good at asking. So I started this work because I wanted to find out more about the brain and how it works, and what is this thing that creates interaction dynamics between people, and how we can get stuck in different places, because my dad got pretty stuck in the telling part after that. He did telling really well, so I know. So when I went on to college, I got a fellowship, and we looked at what we could do with young children to see if we could diagnose the pattern of interaction that will help create the healthiest children when they become adults or when they just grow up and go to school. And so what we discovered, we had a talking typewriter. The 2 people that made that happen was a PhD from GE who happened to be married to my professor, Doreen Stegg, and together they invented this environment. And what it was all about was that we were trained for 6 months to learn how to interact with people without judgment. And the people we were interacting with were these young children. And we said, what if we flip something that was just counterintuitive? Instead of teaching them from books that exist, what if we have them write books and we teach them from their books? Now you're talking about kids that are 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, right? So it's almost like an impossible thing. What we did is we just learned how to interact with them without communicating judgment. We collected stories that they had in their mind about the world, their reality. We had them draw pictures of their reality, and their pictures and their stories became what was programmed in this amazing typewriter that enabled them to learn through different levels how to type. And then we followed these kids for 10 years through school. And what we found was amazing. First of all, we tested their IQ before and after, and an amazing thing happened that had never happened in the history of the world before that we know. Their IQs jumped 15 points through something that was going on during that environment experience. And then we followed them for 10 years, and the kids were outproducing and outperforming their peers. Even if they started out with 87 IQs, they started to jump up and have higher IQs, but also be different. They were interacting differently. There was something about validating their reality that was really important. And I'm saying this because there's a theme here. As we learn to interact with people, whether we're leaders, whether we're in sales, if we fight another person's point of view, we cause resistance. If we validate the reality, even if we disagree with them, something happens in the interaction that enables a better conversation. Does that make sense? Right. And so we were studying resistance and we were studying co-creation at the same time. And so we brought this into companies when I started to do work with them. This was a 10-year longitudinal study, a lot more pull than push. And inside of companies like Boehringer Ingelheim 30 years ago, when they were discovering that they were the least listened to pharmaceutical reps in the country, when they'd go to see doctors, they would be the last one that the doctors wanted to see. And so I deconstructed the conversations between the salespeople and the doctors. And I wouldn't want to be in the room with them either, because knowing that they were down at the bottom, they were pushing harder and saying more to sell, and saying more to sell ideas that they wanted to talk about, not what the doctor wanted to talk about. And so we did a deconstruction and a reconstruction of their conversations. We did a makeover, and that was 28 years ago. Within 8 months, they became one of the top 3. And people were buzzing about it. Even their competitors, that they were saying, what's going on at Boehringer, that they're so much better. So there's something about interaction dynamics that I want you to think about when I'm not here, is a place for you to frame and watch. So, for example, go into meetings and watch the leaders that you're working with and maybe calculate how much telling. I used to have people do a chart, just how much are they telling, how much are they asking, and how much are they listening, and see if you could chart and give that to leaders to think about. Because there are a lot of ways to influence the leaders you work with, but some of these simple, objective, especially for very technical and objective people, is a good place to start to create awareness that there's something in that dynamic that may not be getting them the results that they want. Does that make sense? Any questions so far? Okay. So conversational intelligence is the hardwired and learnable ability to connect, navigate, and grow with others, a necessity to building healthier and more resilient organizations in the face of change. And it begins with trust and ends with the high-quality relationships and business success. I broke conversational intelligence down into 3 parts: connecting, navigating, and growing. And once I started to look at an interaction as not just being me coming over and talking to you, we're talking, that's one thing. But there's something about our relationship that has to form for me to be comfortable enough to talk with you and open up what I really want to say with you. And so that 3-part situation is really important. So I love this quote. You may have heard it before. I know what you believe you understand. I know that you believe you understand what you think I said, but I'm not sure you realize that what you heard is not what I meant. And so this has been quoted many, many times. Other people have taken credit for it, but I do believe this is the person that said it first. And so what's really going on when we're interacting with people? What's really happening? This is what we're learning through neuroscience. First of all, we assume that others see what we see, hear what we hear, and think what we think. But in fact, it's not the case. Something else is going on when I hear words. My mind is making up, filling in whatever those words mean to me. And so it's not really a 100% connection. We don't realize that trust changes how we see reality. When we're in distrust and we're in fear and protection, we're actually listening for things that you're doing that are threatening, rather than listening for how we're connecting. We also know that when we're upset, we can't stand in somebody else's reality. To really connect and to build and collaborate with others, it means me stepping in and perceiving the reality through your eyes. But if I'm pissed off, upset, angry, feeling hurt, I'm not going to be able to get to that part of my brain. That's the prefrontal cortex. That's where empathy lives. That's where how many of you know what mirror neurons are? So for those that don't, mirror neurons live inside of the prefrontal cortex. And when I'm giving you a space to feel comfort with me and not fearful, the mirror neurons activate, and I can actually start to pattern what you're saying and taking it in and remembering it and storing it. So with our best relationships, for each person, we have a place in our brain that starts out as that person. And as we interact with them, it creates layers of information about that person. And the more we can mirror a neuron on someone, the deeper we have an understanding of that person. So the next time, we can almost... How many of you have ever been in really sync with somebody where you kind of can read each other's minds and you're flowing together? And how many of you have had that experience? Yeah. That's when you've done some mirror neuroning and you kind of sense where that person is, that energetic field. So the more we do that, the more we're really in sync. But when we're not having a conversation that feels good, or when we assume things about people, that's not happening. The last thing, we assume we remember what others say when we actually remember what we thought about what they said. We know that when we're interacting with people, so much of it is the after conversation, when we're thinking about it, reinterpreting it, going to somebody and complaining about that person, and they say, yeah, that's great, now we've changed. the conversational space. We assume that meaning is in the speaker, it's actually in the listener. So as you're sitting there, every 12 to 18 seconds while I'm standing up here talking, your mind is going away from what I'm saying in order to make sense of it. It's bringing in other thoughts. I might say one word that takes you into a story, and you're gone. In fact, you should, if you're looking to do an experiment with some of the executives you work with, have them take a piece of paper and chart while they're listening over half an hour to what's going on in a room. And every time they drop out, see if they can drop out and then see when they come back in. And you'll start to see how much we're not really present when we think we are. Okay, makes sense? Yeah.
So I'm the lucky father of a 10-year-old, so
Yep.
I was able to go to a class about dads and daughters, which told me that there are these dramatic differences in the way dads and my little daughter think.
Mm-hmm.
Are there gender differences here, particularly when we say how we think what we think, and then when you get upset? I know that in early adolescence there's a big difference. As men and women grow up, is there still that difference, and did you study that?
Yeah, so here's what we studied. We took monkeys, little boy monkey and a little girl monkey, and put them in I didn't do this was research somebody else did, and it was great research, in a room, and there were dolls and trains. And we took the little monkey and let them find what they wanted, and for some reason all the boy monkeys went for the trains. Isn't that interesting that they would know to do that? And little girls went to the dolls. Isn't that interesting? They would know to do that. So then we took away the boys' train, and behind plexiglass windows, the consultants were watching. And when we took away the little boy's train, what do you think the little boy did? How did they react? Angry? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Went over and started to bang on the wall. Give me my toy back. Blah, blah, blah. Not even thinking about it. There was higher level of testosterone, aggression, and they went out and went after it, right? What do you think the little girl did? Took away the dolly. She's, right? You've got it down, Pat, right? She stood there and cried. If a monkey could cry, this little baby monkey was crying, and she held up her hands like, help me. Come to me. So we know that some of that is hormonally driven. It could a lot be also how in a family a parent cultivates a different type of approach. So I happen to be much more testosterone driven than my husband. He's the sweet one, and he's the nice one and caring one. So I think by how we influence. So I love to do meetings with all men. I feel so at home. I don't know what it is. But yeah, some of it is how we're hardwired. You can see that. But some of it is how we're also homeschooled before we even get into school. So what do you want to learn about that is going to help your leaders? What would you like to learn? Yes.
It's dawning on me as I'm thinking about this. I'm assuming we're talking about face-to-face conversations, and so much of our communication is via email. Mm-hmm. And so how does this apply, or does it not apply, and how is that messing this up?
That's one of, no, I mean, it throws a little extra thought into it, but with the concept of priming, how to prime a conversational space, how to prepare people to think forward, how to prepare people to speak up, so that once we're into the prefrontal cortex, when we're thinking with others and we're not in the second level, which is positional, where I have to look good, show up, and ask more questions so people know I'm more powerful. That's part of where level 2 goes bad. And when phone calls become that, then you hear somebody talking and somebody else trumps because they want to say something again. And it happens in meetings and face-to-face too. So here are some of the things, and I always get asked that question. Here are some of the things that you can do. When people are going to come together, it depends if it's a impromptu phone call and you're having a meeting. Is it more planned or not planned? Mood? Yeah. It's more emails. Oh my goodness. So the email suggestion is that if you're writing an email and it's an emotional situation and there's been a lot of tension in what's going on and you're trying to fix it in that email, write it, get it off your chest, and then don't send it. All right? Show it to a friend and say, what are the words that are going to trigger the other person? Because you will not have picked them out, most likely, or the ones that are going to be the worst. We have a new tool that's going to help you with that, because you can copy the things that you're going to say and put it through this little screener, and it's going to make certain words bigger so you can see how bad they feel to the other person. What? No. Oh, no. We have a tool that we're in the last week of testing that does this. It's called WeIQ. It's got all these things to help you figure out what's really happening in your life. Anyway. So anything that you can do to prepare for any kind of phone call where people get a chance to either ask the questions that they're thinking about, so it's not impromptu, but it's planned. People need voice, and that's what we fight for is voice. So that's what I'm. Another thing you can do if you do have a meeting set up and you have people, and I did some research with a telephone company where we had, knowing that in the Indian culture, people are very good at making circles, sitting around the campfire, passing the peace pipe, and then each person has a chance to say what's on their mind. That's what people want in a conversation, is being able to say what's on their mind. So if you do something where you let people announce themselves and say something about why it's important to be on the call, or something that gets them to be out of the kind of the part of the brain that wants to be the boss or say all the good things and all the right things, and makes the space big enough for people to have a conversation, the conversation will get better. We're hardwired for that. Does that make sense? Yeah. May not have answered all your questions, but yeah.
One of the challenges I think many of us have had is if you're working very hard to try and have the conversation that you've been describing here, and the other person you're trying to have the conversation with is doing all the things that you've been describing that would close it down, and particularly if there's a power dynamic, right, and you're not the person in power, how do you help shift that? How do you shift someone out of where their reaction is always closing down, particularly when there's that power dynamic at play?
A lot of times people that are in that position don't realize they're closing people down. That's the problem. And so there was a story about a woman who was in a company, and she had a boss like that. And after 6 months going to the doctor and having high blood pressure, and the doctor said, "You're under too much stress, you've got to leave the company." So she went to a new company. And within the first day, she was in meetings with her new boss, and all of a sudden she saw some of that same behavior showing up. She was ignored at one point, even though she was new, and it was really horrible for her. And she thought, what am I doing? Am I bringing this out of people that they can do that when I'm interacting with them? And so what we ended up doing with her is asking her to go to the boss and have a conversation, an open, honest conversation, and say, I know that I'm new in this company, and I just noticed a certain pattern that exists in this team, and call it a pattern. Because if he's doing it to more than one person, it's not just attack for you, it's a pattern. And say, I'd like to understand it a little bit better, because I came from another job where this pattern existed, and it was horrible for us and as a team, and it was horrible for me, and that's actually why I left the company. And I just wanted to make sure, am I carrying this with me? Or is this something that's happening in the team and I need to better understand it as a dynamic? And believe it or not, it opened up that guy, and he said, I had no idea that this is what that pattern was doing. I had no idea that I was creating that. Because sometimes when people are addicted to being right, when they're in the tell, sell, yell mode, they are trying to convince somebody of something that they think is really, really important. And it's not, nobody's listening, so they get worse. They do the same thing. They hammer more. They push more. They ignore other people more until they get their point across. So it's about finding those patterns and having people feel comfortable enough saying, wait a minute, I'm seeing this pattern, and am I the cause of it? And being very vulnerable about it and saying, if I am, I want to know what I'm doing. But if it's something that I can do differently or help the team, or if you're noticing, does that make sense to do that? It takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of courage. And that's part of what this is about. Susan was talking about courageous conversations. This is about having the courage to speak up and call out these patterns, and then have leaders understand. So the big thing here is leaders have good intention. That's why they were picked to be the good leaders. But sometimes they don't understand the impact they're having. So how do we close the loop between intention and impact? And I call that the third eye. How do we create that kind of awareness with the leaders we're working with? And even the worst leaders, when they get that, I've had leaders say to me, oh my God, what did you do to my brain? That was because when you get that sensitive, empathetic opening in your brain, the world looks different. And they literally said, I had no idea that I looked that bad, because they'll see people around them now doing what they did. And they'll say, right? So my hope in this work is to help people start to activate that third eye, that you can help your leaders activate the third eye in some way. And it does take courage, for sure. So what we know is that reality gaps exist, how leaders see themselves, how we see ourselves. It's all reality gaps. And some people see the same tree in a small way. They're focusing on it, and they see it for whatever the purpose it is in their world, whether they're apple pickers and are looking at the barrels they need to pick, but other people might see the bigger universe looking at the same tree. How are we going to create a global movement of this new wine or whatever it is? And so human beings, depending on where they live in an organization, have a different view. And a lot of times the leaders that are at the top don't really see what's going on at the bottom or the impact that they're having. And so when we get this type of reality gap in our life, and it's throughout, part of conversational intelligence is to have people learn how to speak about their realities and then talk about what needs to be closed in order to enable those realities to come closer together and to learn how to understand the impact that they're having when those are problems. Conversational intelligence is about getting to the next level of greatness. It depends on the quality of the culture, which depends on the quality of relationships, which depends on the quality of conversations. For years, when I started it, I was working on culture change. And I realized that that's sometimes a long thing to work on and sometimes a hard thing to work on, and you get into all sorts of plumbing inside of companies. But as I worked through every 10 to 15 years, I started to get closer to something that made sense. Relationships are important. But if you can hit the moment of contact when people are communicating, that's where all the change starts to happen, and it works its way back up to changing the culture. Let me ask you a question. Would you like to look at some videos and see if you can become conversationally intelligent masters today, where you can watch a conversation and see if you can pick out some of the dynamics that are taking place and how you would coach that leader if that leader was the leader that you were working with? Would that be good? Okay. So to do that, I need to tell you one or two things more. First of all, you do need to know that conversations that impact people's future can happen as quickly as 0.07 seconds or quicker. And so a lot of the things we want to look at when we look at the videos are happening quickly. You might say, well, this took longer, but that was only this short, so how could this have that impact? And I want you to start to redo that thinking in your mind, because the impact can happen very quickly and be very big. When people are not connecting, their brains can't connect. This is a picture of two brains where people are not on the same path. They're trying to have a conversation. They're not thinking thoughts that match up. They're getting frustrated with each other. The realities are different. They're producing more cortisol. Cortisol has a 26-hour shelf life, so when you're frustrated, it doesn't just happen that minute and go away. It lasts longer. That's something your leaders need to know, is when they have those tension points with people. This is a longer standing impact than when people are getting along. When people are getting along and their brains, this is the mirror imaging. The question is, really listening to connect, asking questions for which you don't have answers, opening up the person, showing respect and understanding and caring and candor. Mirror neurons get activated, and literally what we're seeing happen is that the brains start to mirror each other and connect. And all of a sudden, you hold the same reality. This is real stuff. This is not woo-woo stuff. Is that amazing? Well, when I was doing this 30 years ago, everybody said, this is woo-woo. This is, can't bring spirit into companies, but you can. Because you're now seeing that interactions happen very quickly. This is a movie between Michelle Pfeiffer and Robert Redford. And in this movie, he has Michelle Pfeiffer at a place in her career where she's wanted to be able to be in front of a camera and not use a teleprompter. Her whole life has been teleprompter, where they give her the words. She's got to do it herself. I want you to watch how he's coaching her to do this in front of the camera. They have less than 2 minutes to do it. But I want you to notice, really take notice, because this is part of what this is all about. What are the things that he's saying or doing to her that might cause her to close down? And what are the things he's saying or doing that might cause her to open up? See if you can capture those. I want you to have a group of people that you're going to talk to, so it's got to be at least 3, 4, 5 people so you can work together. When you get in your groups after I show this, I don't want you to be in level 2. Level 2 conversations are where you're trying to persuade each other of what you saw or your point of view. But level 3 is where you're open to sharing and discovering with each other. Okay?
First thing, stamp win.
Which way is that win?
Away from the stink. Floaters stink because their stomachs fill with gas.
That's what brings them up. Sometimes they pop. We can shoot right here. But they're over there. The
Okay.
floaters.
Rouse Soda, Domingo Cats, Colombians, deckhands on the SS Bolivar out of Barranquilla. They jump ship. I call the harbor master. Calling the harbor master is what reporters do. They just don't show up on the scene.
Rouse Soda and Domingo Cat.
We're still too close.
The storm that slammed into Miami yesterday.
Forget yesterday. Yesterday's history. News happens today.
Today. Forget yesterday. Today.
Shoulder-facing cameras and
Oh God, I
pick
think
up
I'm
the
going
body.
to faint. Where's that wind?
Know where you're at. Vic, are you with me? How much time have we got? Okay, a minute and 12 seconds to come up with a lead-in. Okay, now what are you doing? This isn't about lipstick, this is about them. Raul Soto, Domingo Cats. Two guys jump ship for the land of plenty and they drown 25 feet from getting it. People like Raul Soto and Domingo Cats don't get taught how to swim. That's what this story's about, not makeup. Vic, 1 minute, 1 minute.
In the blue water off Miami today.
Miami Beach today. Raul Soto, Domingo Cats. What do they die for? What do they want?
In the blue water off Miami Beach today, divers are still...
Hold the divers. Hold the divers. Lead with Raul Soto and Domingo Cats. I'll tell you what to say.
I know what to say.
Well, then say it.
Raul Soto and Domingo Cat. Raul Soto and Domingo...
25 feet from the big enchilada. 25 feet from the promised land. 25 feet from walking down Collins Avenue in a job bussing dishes at the Blue. Do you have any idea what it's like to want something that bad?
10 seconds, Warren.
Answer me, do you?
Yes.
Then show me.
Rob can't stretch. She's on in 7 seconds. 6.
Tell me a
5,
story.
4, 3, 2.
2 men drowned today off Miami Beach. Raul Soto and Domingo Cats did not belong in the luxurious cabanas that line this stretch of the beach. They jumped ship. They wanted to come to America, and they died. 25 feet from what they must have seen as the promised land.
Were these men seeking asylum, Tally?
Go.
All
ready
we
to wrap it
know,
up,
Rob,
guys.
is that a pilgrimage to El Norte that began in Barranquilla, Colombia, spelled death today for Raul Soto and Domingo Cats. This is Tally Atwater on Miami Beach.
Yes. Girls got chops.
Thank you.
I was wondering if you could say that.
Now, if you saw the movie, you know that they ended up in a relationship. She was very grateful for his help. So turn to your little group. What are some little things that you saw happening that could have triggered her to be less effective? What are the things that you saw happening that could have and did help her to be more effective? See if you can fine-tune some of those observations that you made in your group, okay? Go for it. So what did you see? And what, as you're getting more observationally astute, that's part of what this is about. What kind of things did you see happen in the beginning? What was he doing with her to get her to do this? Anything that helped her? What? But that's just that was kind of midway when he started to do that. He got close and he touched her, but that was where he started to. He was trying things like most leaders do. He was also observing that they weren't working. He tried a lot over and over again, that tell, right? And what did he say to her that was actually caustic, that a lot of leaders don't even realize that they're saying when they do it? Yeah, I'll tell you what to say, right? Yeah, come on. I now have a list of what not to say and what to say, and that's one of them that you don't say, exactly. Any of the other subtleties, because leaders, if you're going to be coaching them, need to be aware of a lot of the things they're doing. Like, he looked down at his watch, there wasn't that much time. She said something, that's not how reporters do it. They call the harbor masters. In other words, little side comments that leaders don't realize. They're not funny. They really hurt. So when you're coaching, yeah.
When the scene starts,
That's not, yeah.
He's actually walking away from her. So he has his back to her. He's talking with his back to her as opposed to turning around and face. Even if he has to walk backwards so that she knows he's talking to her, but he's going this way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. So these are all the subtleties that many leaders don't have any idea that they're doing that are causing people to not perform as well as they'd like them to. Yeah. There's one thing he did, which, again, I would pray that every leader that you work with can do this, which is stop in the moment, realize that their intention and impact were not lining up, and to, in that moment, rethink. That's getting the third eye, which he did. At one point, he stopped, and then he looked at her in the eye. Instead of double-tracking everything that he was doing, he looked at her in the eye and said, what did they die for? He asked her a question. What did they want? Have you ever wanted anything as important as that? So he completely shifted into level 3 kind of questions, pulling out things that they really he didn't know what the answer would be instead of telling her everything to say. And at that moment, and then, can you do it? And he said, yeah. She said, yeah. It's like she went into her prefrontal cortex heart connection, and everything she said after that seemed to come together in the moment without planning. And it's that kind of moment that if we can teach leaders that the other side of the coin, the telling doesn't work, but it's not more of something that's going to make it happen, but it's less of that and more believing in the person at the moment, pulling it out of them, that's when they get their wisdom. That's when they get in touch with the best of who they could be. Make sense? So what I want to show you is as a takeaway, and you have this in your material, is a chart that pulls this all together. This is what many decades of research have led to. When I first started to do this work, I noticed that there were different types of listening, and I started with listening. And so when we listen and things are just really confusing, we have what I call noise in the attic. All sorts of stuff is hanging out in our heads. We're not good listeners, and things aren't making sense. Sometimes we just listen for facts. And it's like face value listening. We think that what we're hearing are facts, but we know that teaching leaders that it's more than just the facts, that it's the emotions and the things that's one level up for leaders, and that's really important. So when you get to that next level, you can be listening for positional things, not facts, but how people are positioned relative to other people. But that's not the end game. The end game is really to elevate yourself above all of that and begin to listen to connect. Listen not to judge people, but listen to connect. And we found that when you listen to connect, you literally change the chemistry of people. They can feel it. So let me put this all together. So here's the chart. We have a conversational dashboard. It's in your materials. What we've learned that there are 3 levels that people go through in order to really connect. It's not just connect. It's connect and then navigate and grow with others. When we feel people resisting us, that's on the left side, we're also knowing that there's some activation in the lower brain. That's how resistance works. When we move people to the prefrontal cortex heart, we move over to the co-creator. It's green, the other is red. And we have to go through all 3 levels to do it. I'm not saying that you jump to level 3 and level 3 is a mecca. I'm saying that learning how to process through 3 levels creates a completely different relationship and experience with people. It moves people from the I to the we. It helps us listen to connect. It helps make visible that when we're over on this side, we're fighting off everything that you're saying, and we're not opening up and taking something in. But when we get to the other side, we're actually activating the part of the brain that has, I call it wise, it makes us wiser and more fit. Wisdom, innovation, strategy, empathy, foresight, insight, and trust. So let me give you the 3 levels. This is where cortisol gets produced. This is oxytocin. I'm not saying that level 1 produces cortisol, but if we stay in level 1, it does. Right? We all need to use some of that level 1 because we're confirming what we know, and I'll show you in a second what that looks like. So here's the levels. Level 1 is called transactional. Level 2 is called positional, and level 3 is transformational. And when we're at the top level, we're opening up different parts of our brain than we are at the other 2 levels. When we're in level 1, the interaction dynamic is telling and asking. And again, when it goes too much to telling, it's the tell, sell, yell syndrome, and people get stuck there. They do more of the same thing. When we're in level 2, it's advocating and inquiring because we're positional now. We have a point of view that we want to influence people. Many negotiation programs teach people how to be more positional and then work around that. But that's not enough from what my research is proving and showing. When we get to level 3, it's a lot more sharing and discovering. We are open for influence. I will show that I changed my mind. That's respect to another human being when what they said influenced me enough to think differently about something. Doesn't mean I'm giving up my point of view, but I'm thinking differently. That's powerful. So confirming what we know is what we're doing in level 1. It's very transactional. Level 2 is defending what we know. And then level 3 is discovering what we don't know. And in each case, the listening is different. Face value listening, we think things are facts. We're spending our time in information, and it's not enough. When we move to level 2, defending what we know, it's positional listening. Many times we have to as a leader, and we have to teach leaders how to do that well. Help move people towards a common goal or a shared understanding of the future. We're not saying don't do that. It's important. But many leaders get, again, stuck in that. Jacques Nasser, when he was the CEO of Ford, went around the country talking to people about the new vision. And it was the most exciting time in his life and the life of the company. Everybody was excited and they were on board and ready to do it. Then he went back across the country again to see what everybody had done. And people weren't doing what he thought they would do. So he started to yell at them and tell them they had to do it this way and tell them they had to do it that way. And then when the board got involved, he was no longer the CEO of the company. So it's a common thing for leaders to fall into. And with your coaching and guidance, you're able to help move people through this and not get stuck. And the last one then is listening to connect. And there's something very beautiful when judgment is removed, like you saw when I was doing the work with the young children. Creating an environment with less judgment enables people to experience each other in a more whole way. So I think if you spend time thinking about these and talking to some of the executives that you're working with, I have never found anything but the following happen. People would say, oh my God, I had no idea that all our meetings were transactional. And I thought that we were getting results because we talked about all the things we were going to do. But it doesn't work through the issues with people. And then others would say, oh my God, that meeting wasn't really good because we were all fighting with each other about what we wanted. And Lockheed Martin, that I worked with for a while, burned $30 million, $1 million a day, in being stuck at getting a decision in their organization about an ERP system, believe it or not. And so we did some work with them around conversational intelligence, and in 3 hours, we dissolved that to discovery and people really listening to each other. So the last one is, it's not just one, it's all three. And when you get to the top, you activate something inside of a company that enables them to catalyze transformation and change. And that's where we started when Susan said change management is so important to our organization. If we can move more into that level, then everything will change. So my quick story before I leave is that there was a CEO named Mr. Anderson, and he was asked to leave the company. And the very next day, a woman went up on the elevator to the 30th floor where he was and asked the assistant if she could see Mr. Anderson. And the assistant said, I'm sorry, he doesn't work here anymore. And she said, thank you, and went downstairs. And the next day, she got on the elevator, went up to the 30th floor, went over to the assistant and said, I'd like to make an appointment to see Mr. Anderson. And the woman said, wait a minute. Didn't I see you here yesterday? And she said, yeah. I said then he doesn't work here. He still doesn't work here. And she said, well, good. Thank you very much. And the third day, she goes up, and same thing, pushes the button, goes up, opens the door. And finally, the assistant gets up out of her chair, and she says, this is ridiculous. I've told you 2 days in a row that he's not here. Why do you keep asking to see Mr. Anderson? And the woman says, because I just love hearing you say, Mr. Anderson doesn't work here anymore. So enjoy this work. I hope that you'll find something here that will advance your lives and the lives of the leaders you work with. It's the most important work in the world. Leaders discover a new part of themselves that they've never released before, like my father learned when he had someone help him through a stuttering. Every leader has things that were their baggage from the past. We're all little kids inside trying to be big. And so, use this work in good ways. I'd love to hear that it's made a difference. And if you have any questions, let's leave the door open. So,
thank you. Thanks.